The Pacific Ocean, July 3rd, 1937.
On the last lap of her magnificent flight round the world by way of the equator, Miss Amelia Earhart was lost in mid-ocean. On the 2,500-mile hop to Howland Island, she was reported missing.
It's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. Where is the wreckage of Amelia Earhart's plane?
Amelia Earhart vanished on the final leg of her quest to be the first woman to fly around the world. Tonight, there are intriguing new clues about what might have happened to her.
Scientists are now preparing to set sail for the spot where they believe Amelia Earhart disappeared.
Through the years, I've been very fortunate in the type of flying I've done.
Amelia Mary Earhart was born July 24, 1897 in Atchison, Kansas, the daughter of Samuel Edwin Stanton Earhart and Amelia Amy Earhart. She was born in the home of her grandfather, who was a former federal judge and president of Atkinson Savings Bank. His name was Alfred Otis. According to family custom, she was named after her two grandmothers, Amelia Josephine Hayes and Mary Wells Patton. From an early age, Amelia Earhart and her younger sister Grace were close, Grace following Amelia's every step. The two girls had an unconventional upbringing, and the mother did not believe in raising her children to be nice little girls. Their grandmother disapproved of the clothes they wore. A sense of adventure struck the two Earhart children. They would go on daily explorations throughout their neighborhood, climbing trees, hunting rats with a rifle, and sledding. Many biographers considered the young Earhart a tomboy. In 1904, with help from her uncle, Amelia cobbled together a homemade ramp, inspired after a roller coaster she had seen on a trip to St. Louis. She secured the ramp to the roof of the family tool shed. Her first flight ended dramatically. She ended up with a broken wooden box that served as her sled, a bruised lip, torn dress, and as she called, a sense of exhilaration as she told her sister, "Oh, Pidge, it's just like flying." Though her father had some trouble with his career up to that point, in 1907, his job as a claims officer with the Rock Island Railroad had the family transferred to Des Moines, Iowa. The very next year, at the age of 10, Amelia saw her first aircraft at the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines, Iowa. Her father tried to interest her into taking a flight, but one look at the rickety flivver was enough. Amelia was not interested and wanted to go back to the merry-go-round. She described the biplane as a thing of rusty wire and wood and not at all interesting. The two sisters remained with their grandparents in Atchison while their parents moved into a much smaller quarters in Des Moines, Iowa. The two girls received homeschooling. In 1909, the family reunited in Des Moines. The two were enrolled in public school for the first time as Amelia, 12, entered the 7th grade. The family's finances improved. They got a new house and even hired 2 servants, but things began to fall apart. Her father was an alcoholic. In 1914, he was forced to retire from his job. He tried to rehabilitate himself through treatment, but was never reinstated at the Rock Island Railroad. Around this time, Amelia's grandmother, Amelia Otis, suddenly died, leaving a substantial inheritance. Her daughter's share was placed into a trust, fearing that Edwin's alcoholism would drain the funds. The Otis household was auctioned off along with all of its contents. Amelia was heartbroken. She described this as the end of her childhood. In 1915, Amelia's father finally found work as a clerk at the Great Northern Railroad in St. Paul, Minnesota. Amelia entered Central High School as a junior. Her father applied to transfer to Springfield, Missouri in 1915, but the current claims officer reconsidered his retirement and demanded his job back, leaving the elder Earhart with nowhere to go. Faced with another inevitable move, Amy Earhart took her children to Chicago. They lived there with friends. Amelia chose a high school that was much further away from her home. She looked for the school with the best science lab. She enrolled in Hyde Park High School. She spent a miserable semester at the school. A yearbook caption captured the essence of her unhappiness. Amelia Earhart, the girl in brown who walks alone. Amelia graduated in 1916. Throughout her troubled childhood, she continued to aspire for a future career. She wanted to be a successful woman. She kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings of all the successful women she could find who worked in prominently male fields. Amelia enrolled in junior college at Ogden School in Randall, Pennsylvania, now Penn State Abington. In 1917, Amelia went on a Christmas vacation to visit her sister in Toronto. World War I had been raging at this point. Amelia saw the returning wounded soldiers. After receiving training as a nurse's aide from the Red Cross, she began to work voluntary aid detachment at Spadina Military Hospital. Her duties were to prepare food in the kitchen for patients with special diets and hand out prescribed medication in the hospital's dispensary. During her time at the hospital, Amelia heard stories from military pilots that increased her interest in flying. In 1918, the Spanish flu reached Toronto. Amelia was engaged in horrible nursing duties that included night shifts at the military hospital. She eventually became a patient herself, experiencing pneumonia and maxillary sinusitis. She was hospitalized for pneumonia in early November 1918 and later discharged in late December 1918, 2 months after her illness had started. The symptoms she suffered were pain and pressure around one eye with a lot of mucus drainage from the nostrils and throat. This time was the pre-antibiotic era. She had a painful minor operation to wash out the affected sinus. The procedure was not successful, and Amelia continued to have worsening headaches and lasted nearly a year. She spent this time at her sister's home in Northampton, Massachusetts. She passed her time reading poetry, learning to play the banjo, and studying mechanics. Chronic sinusitis affected her throughout her life, affecting her flying and other activities. She even had to wear a face bandage later in life on the airfield to cover a drainage tube. Amelia, with a female friend, visited an airfield in Toronto, held in conjunction with the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto. She quoted, "The interest aroused in me in Toronto led me to all the air circuses in the vicinity." One of the highlights of the day was a flying exhibition put on by a World War I flying ace. The pilot spotted Earhart and her friend who were watching in a clearing and dived at them. "I am sure he said to himself, 'Watch me make them scamper,'" she said about the incident. Earhart stood her ground as the aircraft came close. "I did not understand at the time," she said, "but I believe that red airplane said something to me as it swished by." By 1919, Amelia prepared to enter Smith College, where her sister was enrolled. She changed her mind and enrolled in a course in medical studies and other programs at Columbia University. Amelia quit a year later to be with her parents, who had reunited in California. December 28, 1920, Amelia, with her father, attended an aerial meet at Daughtry Field in Long Beach, California. She asked her father to ask about passenger flights and flying lessons. Her father booked a passenger flight the following day at Emory Rogers Field. It cost $10 for a 10-minute flight with Frank Hawks, a famous air racer. The ride Frank Hawks gave changed Amelia's life forever. She said this about the flight: "By the time I had got 200 or 300 feet off the ground, I knew I had to fly." The next month, Amelia had a female flying instructor, Netta Snook. The contract was for 12 hours of instruction for $500. Amelia worked a variety of different jobs, including photographer, truck driver, and stenographer at the local telephone company. She saved $1,000 for flying lessons. Amelia had her first lesson on January 3, 1921 at Kenner Field on the west side of Long Beach Boulevard and Tweedy Road in the current town of Southgate. Netta Snook used a crash salvage Curtiss JN4 Canuck that she restored for training purposes. In order to reach the airfield, Amelia had to take the bus to the end of the line and walk 4 miles. Amelia's commitment to flying required her to accept the hard work and rudimentary conditions that were required in early aviation training. She even cropped her hair off to complete her image in the short style that other female flyers had. 6 months after starting her aviation training in the summer of 1921, she purchased a second-hand, a bright chromium yellow Kinner Airster biplane. Against her instructor's advice, she nicknamed the biplane the Canary after her first successful solo landing. She bought a new leather flying coat due to the newest of its condition. She was subject to teasing. She tried to age her coat by sleeping in it and staining it with aircraft oil. On October 22, 1922, Amelia set a world record for female pilots. She flew the Airster to an altitude of 14,000 feet. On May 16, 1923, Amelia Earhart became the 16th woman in the United States to be issued a pilot's license. Throughout the 1920s, after a disastrous investment in a failed gypsum mine, Amelia's inheritance from her grandmother diminished until it was exhausted. Without the option of recouping any of her investments in flying, Amelia sold the Canary as well as a second-hand Kenner and bought a yellow Kissel Goldbug Speedster two-seater automobile, which she nicknamed the Yellow Peril. She experienced another bout of severe sinus problems. Her pain worsened, and in 1924 she was hospitalized for another sinus operation, which again was unsuccessful. Earhart tried to start a number of ventures, including setting up a photography company. She eventually set out in a new direction. Her parents divorced in 1924. Following this, her and her mother went on a transcontinental trip from California, stopping through the western United States, and a trip to Banff, Alberta. They eventually ended up in Boston. She had to undergo another sinus operation. This one was a little more successful. After she recuperated, she returned to Columbia University, but was forced to abandon her studies and any future plans for college because her mother could no longer afford the tuition fees. Soon after this, she found employment first as a teacher, then as a social worker in 1925. She lived in Medford, Massachusetts. She continued her interest in aviation. She flew the first official flight at Denison Airport in 1927. She wrote for a local newspaper promoting flying, and her local celebrity grew. She laid out plans for an organization devoted to female flyers. After Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic in 1927, Amy Guest wanted to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. She decided the trip was too perilous for her to undertake. She offered to sponsor the project, suggesting that they find another girl with the right image. Amelia was at work one afternoon in April 1928. She got a phone call from Captain Hilton H. Rayleigh, who asked her, "Would you like to fly the Atlantic?" The coordinators of the project, including George Putnam, interviewed Amelia and asked her to accompany William Stultz, pilot and co-pilot Lewis Gordon, on the flight, basically as a passenger, but with the added duty of keeping a flight log. The group departed Truppetsea Harbor, Newfoundland, June 17, 1928. They landed at Pwyll, near Bury Point, South Wales, 20 hours and 40 minutes later. When interviewed, she said, "Stultz did all the flying. I was just baggage, like a sack of potatoes. Maybe someday I'll try it alone." She received a warm welcome when she landed at Woolston, Southampton, England. She flew the Avro Avian 594, owned by Lady Mary Health. She later purchased the aircraft and shipped it back to the United States. When the three returned to the United States, they were greeted with a parade, followed by a reception with President Calvin Coolidge at the White House. The press referred to her as the Queen of the Air. After her return, she went on a lecture tour in 1928 and 1929. While she was lecturing, Putnam decided to promote her campaign. He published her book, new lecture tours, and used her picture to endorse products. The marketing campaign was a success, and she was now in the public mind. She made a trip in August 1928 and became the first woman to fly solo across the North American continent and back. She made her first attempt at air racing in 1929. Amelia and George Putnam spent a lot of time together, and he divorced his wife in 1929 and sought out Earhart. He proposed to her 6 times before she finally agreed to marry him. On February 7, 1931, they were married at Putnam's mother's house. Amelia referred to her marriage as a partnership with dual control. In a letter to Putnam and hand-delivered to him on the day of the wedding, she wrote this: "I want you to understand I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you. Similarly, I may have to keep some place where I can go to be myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times a confinement of even an attractive cage." These views on marriage were liberal for the times. She believed in equal breadwinners and decided to keep her own last name, and they had no honeymoon. On the morning of May 20th, 1932, the 34-year-old Amelia Earhart set off from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, with a copy of the Telegraph Journal given to her by a journalist, Stuart Truman, to confirm the date of the flight. She wanted to fly to Paris in her single-engine Lockheed Vega 5B to emulate Charles Lindbergh's solo flight 5 years earlier. After a flight of 14 hours 56 minutes, during which she contended with strong northerly winds and icing conditions, the plane also suffered mechanical problems. She landed in a pasture at Colthmore near Derry, Northern Ireland. When a farmer asked, "Have you flown far?" she replied, "From America." She was the first woman to fly solo over the Atlantic and received the Distinguished Flying Cross from Congress, the Cross of Knight of the Legion of Honor from the French government, and the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society from Herbert Hoover. As her fame grew, she developed friendship with many celebrities, most notably First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who shared many of Amelia's interests and passions, especially women's causes. On January 11, 1935, Amelia became the first aviator to fly solo from Honolulu, Hawaii to Oakland, California. This flight had been attempted before, but her flight was routine with no breakdowns and was a success. She flew solo from Los Angeles to Mexico City on April 19th. The next record attempt was a nonstop flight from Mexico City to New York. Setting off May 8th, her flight was uneventful. Large crowds gathered to meet her at Newark, New Jersey. This was a concern because she had to be careful not to taxi into the crowd. Between 1930 and 1935, Amelia set 7 women's speed distance aviation records. By 1935, she contemplated a new prize, one flight, which I most wanted to attempt, a circumnavigation of the globe as near as its waistline. For this venture, she would need a new aircraft. In 1935, she joined Purdue University as a visiting faculty member to counsel women on careers and as a technical advisor for its Department of Aeronautics. In 1936, Earhart started planning an around-the-world flight. Although others had flown around the world, hers would be the longest, at 29,000 miles, because it followed a rough route around the equator. With financial support from Purdue, in July 1936, a Lockheed Electra 10E registration number 16020 was built at Lockheed Aircraft Company to her specifications, which included extensive modifications to the fuselage to incorporate many additional fuel tanks. Amelia dubbed the twin-engine monoplane her flying laboratory. The plane was built at the Lockheed Burbank, California plant, and after it was delivered, it was hangared at Mansi United Air Services, which was just across the airfield from the Lockheed plant. Earhart chose Captain Harry Manning as her navigator. He was not only navigator, but he was also a pilot and skilled radio operator who knew Morse code. The original plan was a 2-person crew. Earhart would fly and Manning would navigate during a flight across the country that included Earhart, Manning, and Putnam. Earhart flew using landmarks. She and Putnam knew where they were. Manning did a navigation fix, but that fix alarmed Putnam because Manning's position put them in the wrong state, although they were flying close to the state line, so the navigation error was minor, but Putnam was still concerned. After this, Putnam and Mance arranged a night flight to test Manning's navigation skills under poor navigational conditions. Manning's position was off by 20 miles. This was an acceptable error because it was within 30 miles, but Mance and Putnam wanted a better navigator. Through contacts in Los Angeles aviation community, Fred Noonan was chosen as the second navigator because there were other significant factors that had to be dealt with using celestial navigation for aircraft. He was experienced in maritime and flight navigation. Noonan had recently left Pan Am, where he established most of the company's China Clipper seaplane routes across the Pacific. Noonan had also been responsible for training Pan American's navigators for the route between San Francisco to Manila. The original plan was for Noonan to navigate from Hawaii to Howland, a particularly difficult portion of the flight. Then Manning would continue with Earhart to Australia, and then she would proceed on her own for the remainder of the project. The first attempt on March 17, 1937, Amelia and her crew flew the first leg from Oakland, California to Honolulu, Hawaii. In addition to Earhart and Noonan, Harry Manning and Mance were on board. Due to lubrication and galing problems with the propeller hubs, variable pitch mechanisms, the aircraft needed to be serviced in Hawaii. The Electra ended up on Luke Field in Pearl Harbor. The flight resumed 3 days later from Luke Field with Earhart, Noonan, and Manning on board. Their next destination was Howland Island, a small island in the Pacific Ocean. Manning was the only skilled radio operator, and he had made arrangements to use the radio direction finding to hone in on the island. The flight never left Luke Field. During the takeoff, there was an uncontrolled ground loop. The forward landing gear collapsed. Both propellers hit the ground and the plane skidded on its belly. A portion of the runway was damaged. The cause of the ground loop is controversial. Some of the witnesses at Luke Field, including an Associated Press journalist, said they saw a tire blow. Earhart thought either the Electra's right tire had blown or the landing gear had collapsed. Some sources, including Mance, cited pilot error. The aircraft was severely damaged and the flight was called off. The Electra was shipped by sea to the Lockheed Burbank facility for repairs. Manning took leave of absence due to the flight. He felt that there had been way too many problems. He ended his involvement with the trip. This left only Earhart and Noonan. Neither of them were very skilled radio operators. While the Electra was getting repaired, Earhart and Putnam received additional funds for another attempt, this time flying west to east due to the trade winds. The second attempt began with an unpublicized flight from Oakland to Miami. It was only after they had arrived in Miami when Earhart publicly announced her plans to circumnavigate the globe. The reason for going west to east was because of the trade winds and weather patterns along the planned route. Fred Noonan was Earhart's only crew member. They departed Miami on June 1, 1937, and had numerous stops in South America, Africa, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia. They arrived at Lae, New Guinea on June 29, 1937. At this stage, about 22,000 miles of the journey had been completed, with 7,000 miles remaining, which would be over the Pacific Ocean. July 2, 1937, at 10 a.m., Earhart and Noonan took off from Lae Airfield in the very heavily loaded Electra. Their intended destination was Howland Island, a very flat sliver of land 6,500 feet long and 1,600 feet wide. 10 feet high, 2,556 miles away. The expected flying time was 20 hours. So accounting for the 2-hour time zone difference between Lae and Howland and crossing of the international date line, the aircraft was expected to arrive at Howland the morning of the next day, July 2nd. The aircraft departed with 1,100 gallons of fuel. At 3 p.m. Lae time, Earhart reported her altitude at 10,000 feet. But that they were reducing altitude due to thick clouds. Around 5 p.m., Earhart reported her altitude at 7,000 feet and a speed of 150 knots. Their last known position report was near the Nukunumu Islands, around 800 miles into the flight. In preparation for the trip, the United States Coast Guard had sent the cutter Itasca to the island. The cutter offered to ferry news reporters to the island, but it also had communication and navigation functions. The plan was that the cutter would communicate with Earhart's aircraft via the radio, transmit a radio homing signal so it would make it easy to find Howland Island. Without precise celestial navigation, do radio direction finding if Earhart used her 500 kHz transmitter, and to use her boilers to make a smoke curtain that could be seen all over the horizon. The Electra had radio equipment for communication and navigation, but specific details about the equipment are not clear. There were problems with the RDF equipment during the flight from Brazil to Africa. The RDF equipment did not work, and the RDF station at Darwin expected to be in contact with the Electra, but when she arrived there, she stated that the RDF was not functioning. The problem was a blown fuse. The United States Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed at Howland Island and tasked to communicate with the Electra and guide them to the island once they arrived in the vicinity. Noonan and Earhart were to do voice communications on 3105 kHz at night and 6210 kHz during the day. There were a series of misunderstandings. The final approach to Howland Island using the radio navigation was not successful. Fred Noonan wrote earlier about problems affecting the accuracy of radio detection finding in navigation. The Electra expected the Itasca to transmit signals that the Electra could use as an RDF beacon to find the ship. In theory, the plane could listen for the signal while rotating the antenna. A sharp minimum indicates that the direction of the beacon. The electric equipment had failed due to a blown fuse earlier, but the fuse was replaced. As the Electra neared Howland, Earhart could hear the transmission from the Itasca on 7,500 kHz. She was unable to determine a minimum, so she could not determine the direction of the Itasca. Earhart was also unable to determine a minimum at Lae. One theory is that Earhart's RDF equipment did not work at 7,500 kHz. Most RDF equipment at the time was not designed to work above 2,000 kHz. When operated above their design frequency, loop antennas lose their directionality. Some sources have noted that Earhart's apparent lack of understanding of her direction-finding equipment, which had been fitted to the aircraft just prior to the flight. Video evidence from Lae during the takeoff suggests that the antenna mounted underneath the fuselage may have been torn off from the fuel-heavy Electra during taxi or takeoff from Lae's grass runway, although no antenna was ever reported to be found at Lae. During Earhart and Noonan's approach to Howland Island, the Itasca received a strong, clear voice transmission from Earhart, identifying as KHAQQ, but she was unable to hear voice transmissions from the ship. The voice transmissions from the ship would also be used by the Electra for direction finding, implying that the aircraft's direction finder was not functional. At 2:45 a.m. and just before 5 a.m. on July 2nd, the first two calls were received. They were routine, with reports stating that the weather was cloudy and overcast. The calls were broken up by static, but the aircraft was still a long distance away. 6:14 a.m., another call was received. The aircraft stated that they were within 200 miles. They requested that the ship use its direction finder to provide a bearing for the aircraft. Earhart began whistling in the microphone to provide a continual signal for them to home in on. It was at this moment when the operators on the Itasca realized that their RDF system could not be tuned to the aircraft's 3,105 kHz frequency. Radio man Leo Ballards commented that, "I was sitting there sweating blood because I couldn't do a darn thing about it." A similar call was received at 6:45 a.m. asking for a bearing. Earhart estimated they were 100 miles out. An Itasca radio log at 7:30 to 7:40 a.m. estimates Earhart on Northwest says, "Running out of gas, only half hour left, can't hear us at all. We hear and are sending a 3105 ES. 500, same time constantly." Another log at 7:42 a.m. states, "KHAQQ is calling Itasca. We must be on you but cannot see you. But gas is running low. Been able to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. Earhart's 7:58 a.m. transmission said she could not hear the Itasca and asked them to send voice signals so she could try to take a radio bearing. The Itasca reported this as being the loudest possible signal. This indicates that Earhart and Noonan were in the immediate area. The Itasca could not send voice at that frequency she asked for. Morse code signals were sent instead. Earhart acknowledged receiving these, but said she was unable to determine their direction. Her last known transmission was at 8:43 a.m. "We are on the line 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait." A few moments later, she was back on the same frequency, 3105 kHz, with the transmission that was logged as questionable. "We were running on line north and south." The transmission seemed to imply that her and Noonan believed they had reached Howland Island's charted position. This is incorrect by about 5 nautical miles. At this point, the Itasca used her oil-filled boilers to generate thick black smoke for a period of time. But Earhart and Noonan did not see the smoke. There were scattered clouds at the time, and this may have increased the problems the Electra was having. The clouds cast dark shadows on the ocean surface and may have been almost indistinguishable from the island's very flat profile. It is unknown whether any more radio signals were received after the pair were lost. If there were, it would most likely have been a weak signal. Earhart was on 3105 kHz, a signal restricted for aviation use. This signal was not thought to be fit for broadcasting long distances. When Amelia was at cruising altitude between Ley and Howland, neither station heard her transmission that was scheduled at 8:15. The very last voice transmission received on Howland Island said that Earhart and Noonan were flying along a line of position running north-south on 157337. Noonan would have calculated and drawn on a chart as passing through Howland Island. After Howland lost contact, many attempts were made to reach them with both voices and Morse code transmissions. Radio operators across the Pacific and the United States could have heard signals from the downed Electra, but these were most likely very weak and unintelligible. Some of the reports of receiving transmissions from the downed Electra were confirmed as hoaxes, but others were genuine. Pan American Airlines stations took bearings from signals and suggested that they originated from a few different locations, including Gardner Island, which is 360 miles to the south-southeast. It is believed that these signals from Earhart and Noonan had to have come from the land, that if the aircraft was in the water, the electrics would not have worked. Some signals were received up to 4 to 5 days later, but none of them were understood. The captain of the USS Colorado said this about the signals: "There is no doubt many stations were calling the Earhart plane on the plane's frequency, some by voice and other by signal. all of these added to the confusion and doubtfulness of the authenticity of reports. The Itasca started a search north and west of Howland Island. Based on initial assumptions, the Navy soon joined in on the search for around 3 days and sent resources. The initial search from the Itasca involved running the line 157337, a position to the north-northwest from Howland Island, the line that Earhart had stated in her final transmission. The Itasca then searched northeast of the island and a wider area to the northwest, based on bearings taken from radio transmissions. Searchers were sent to a line of 281 degrees and found no evidence of the downed Electra. 4 days after the last confirmed radio transmission on July 6, 1937, the captain of the battleship Colorado was ordered to take over all Naval and Coast Guard units to form a coordinated search effort. In a later search, searchers were directed to the Phoenix Islands, south of Howland. A week after the disappearance, an aircraft from the Colorado flew over several islands, including Gardner Island. It had been uninhabited for over 40 years. A report on Gardner Island read, "Here, signs of recent habitation were clearly visible, but repeated circling and zooming failed to elicit any answering wave from a possible inhabitant, and it was finally taken for granted that no one was there. At the western end of the island, a tramp steamer of about 4,000 tons lay high and almost dry, head on the coral beach with her back broken in 2 places. The lagoon at Gardner looked significantly deep and certainly large enough so that a seaplane or even an airboat could have taken off or landed in any direction without any difficulty. It is believed that Miss Earhart could have landed her aircraft in the lagoon and swam her way to shore." The report also found that Gardner Island's shape and size that was recorded on the charts was very inaccurate. More searches went and searched for any signs of the Electra, north, west, and southwest of Howland Island. Based on the fact that the Electra could have ditched in the ocean, or that there was a life raft floating out in the open ocean, President Roosevelt had authorized a massive 2-week search to find the 2 flyers that cost $4 million in 1937, around $85,250,000 with inflation in 2023. The largest and most expensive search in United States history up to that point. Search and rescue techniques were not as they are today, and the search was based mostly on assumptions and false reports. Despite this massive search, no evidence was found of Earhart, Noonan, or the Electra 10E. The USS Lexington, battleship USS Colorado, United States Coast Guard cutter Itasca, the Japanese survey vessel Koshu, and the Japanese seaplane tender Kamoi all searched for a week, covering 150,000 square miles. After the search authorized by President Roosevelt ended, Putnam financed a private search by local authorities from nearby Pacific islands. They concentrated on the Gilbert Islands. No trace was ever found. Putnam tried to become trustee of Earhart's estate to pay for the searches and bills. He requested to have the declared death and absenteeism waiting period of 7 years waived. As a result of this, Amelia Earhart was declared legally dead on January 5, 1939. There are many theories and speculations about what happened to Earhart and Noonan. Most historians believe that the Electra ran out of gas and crashed into the Pacific. But of course, there are many theories and conspiracy theories about what really happened. The Gardner Island theory. This theory states that Earhart and Noonan were unable to find Howland Island. They did not want to waste time searching for it and instead turned to the south to look for other islands. The 157337 transmission suggests that they flew a course of 157 degrees, which would have taken them past Baker Island if they missed it, and they would reach the Phoenix Islands. One of these islands is Gardner Island. It has been subject to debate since the first search area. When the United States Navy planes from the Colorado searched Gardner Island, they had seen signs of recent habitation. But the island had been completely inhabited for over 40 years. They did not see any signs of the Electra or Earhart and Noonan. Putnam's teams again searched the Phoenix Islands, but found nothing. In October 1937, a group visited the island with potential settlers. They walked the whole island but found no plane. In 1938, workers were sent to start construction of a settlement. In 1939, the USS Bushnell surveyed the island. In April of 1940, a skull was discovered and buried. British colonial officer Gerald Gallagher did not learn about this until September. he did a more thorough search of the discovery area looking for artifacts. The search did find bones, a bottle, a shoe, and a sextant box under a tree on the southeast corner of the island. On September 23, 1940, he radioed his supervisors that he had found a skeleton, possibly that of a woman, in an old sextant box. The box was later revealed that it had been left during a hydrographic survey. It had 2 serial numbers on it, 3500 and 1542. Documents discovered in 2018 showed that the USS Bushnell had a Brandis & Sons sextant with serial number 152 in 1938 to 1939. Gallagher said that the bones looked more than 4 years old, but there seemed to be a slight chance that they could have been the remains of Amelia Earhart. The remains were sent to Fiji. Dr. D.W. Hoodless examined the bones, measured them, and wrote a report using Carl Pearson's formula for stature and length of the femur, tibia, and humerus. He concluded that the person was around 5 foot 5.5 inches. He wrote that the skeleton could be that of a short, stocky, muscular European, or even a person of mixed European descent. Earhart was 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighed 118 pounds. Hoodless also wrote, "It may be definitely stated that the skeleton is that of a male. Owing to the weather-beaten condition of the bones, it is impossible to be dogmatic in regards to the age of the person at the time of death, but I am of the opinion that he was not less than 45 years old of age, and that probably he was older, say between 45 and 50 years old." These bones were misplaced in Fiji and lost. Researchers around the turn of the 21st century argued that Hoodless was wrong and that the bones were not from a male, and used his own measurements to try and prove this. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery began an investigation in 1988, suggesting that Earhart and Noonan may have flown without radio contact for 2.5 hours to the then uninhabited Gardner Island and landed the plane on a reef near a wreck of a large freighter on the northwest side of the island, and ultimately perished. Artifacts discovered by them included improvised tools, an aluminum panel, and an oddly cut piece of clear plexiglass, and a size 9 woman's shoe heel. A photo of Earhart's Electra shows an aluminum panel. The group claims that the piece they found has the same dimensions and rivet pattern as the one in the photo. The Japanese capture theory. In 1966, a CBS correspondent, Fred Gorner, published a book claiming that the two were captured and executed when the aircraft crashed on the island of Saipan. Saipan is more than 2,700 miles away from Howland Island. Later theories suggest it was actually the Marshall Islands, still 800 miles from Howland. In 1990, a Saipanese woman claimed to have witnessed Earhart and Noonan's execution by Japanese soldiers. No confirmation has come to light about these claims. Many proposed photographs of Earhart during her captivity have been identified as fraudulent or were taken before her final flight. A different version of the theory states instead of capturing the pair, the Japanese shot down the Electra, but no evidence of this exists. A gravesite has been rumored to be on the spot where Earhart and Noonan were buried by the Japanese since the end of World War II, on Tinian, 5 miles from Saipan. Archaeologists performed a dig in 2004 but found no bones. A photo caused controversy shown in a Discovery Channel documentary. The picture showed a Caucasian male on a dock who appeared to look like Noonan, a woman sitting on the dock but facing away from the camera who had the same physique and hairstyle resembling Earhart. But the original source of the photograph was a Japanese travel guide published in October of 1935. So the photo had to be taken in 1935 or before. The photo had to be unrelated to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan's disappearance in 1937. There is also rumors that Earhart was forced to make propaganda radio broadcasts as one of the many women compelled to serve as Tokyo Rose. George Putnam took this seriously, and after listening to the recordings, he did not believe the voice to be that of his wife, Amelia Earhart. There are also claims that Earhart survived the flight and moved to New Jersey, changed her name, and remarried and became Irene Craigmile Bolam. A book introduced these claims in 1970. Irene denied this and filed a lawsuit requesting $1.5 million in damages. The publisher withdrew the book off the market and reached an out-of-court settlement. The crash and sink theory. Many researchers believe the Electra ran out of fuel and crash landed into the ocean while searching for Howland Island. The Electra had enough fuel to reach Howland with some to spare. The extra fuel was to compensate for any headwinds or flying time to search for the island. The plane would fly a compass course at night, and by morning it would determine a sun line that ran 157,337 degrees. At 7:42 a.m., Earhart reported, "We must be on you but cannot see you, but gas is running low. Have been able to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. At 8:45 a.m., we are on the line 157,337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait." After these two messages at 7:42 a.m. and 8:43 a.m., her signal stayed consistent, indicating that she had never left the immediate area of Howland Island before she ran out of fuel. In between these two messages at 7:42 a.m. and 8:43 a.m., her signal stayed consistent, indicating that she had never left the immediate area of Howland Island before she ran out of fuel. The Coast Guard made this determination by tracking her signal as she approached the island, noting that the signal levels from a report at 200 and 100 miles out. These reports were 30 minutes apart, proving vital ground speed clues. Based on these facts and no more transmissions from Earhart, they concluded that the pair had crashed somewhere near Howland Island. There have been many searches around the waters of Howland Island and many other islands that dot the Pacific Oceans and in between, but no evidence has been found of the Electra on the ocean floor. You have heard her backstory, details of her around-the-world flight, the horror that ensued when she could not reach the island. You have heard the theories about the pair's disappearance. What do you believe happened? I'd like to know. Put it down there in the comments. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.